Hey folks, Zach Ostrom here, Ivan Sutter, Indianapolis Star. Um, Trying to get this kind of back going again. Forgive me, the YouTube channel went a little bit quiet around the end of the season. I shifted over to some Purdue stuff, and then unfortunately had some family things come up that caused me to be off for a couple weeks. But trying to, in particular, kind of gear this back up around the transfer portal, which has obviously kind of everyone's attention in college basketball this time of year. The portal window is kind of open and in full flow. This is one of the real spikes in activity after the Final Four. There's a dead period around the Final Four, and then after that, there's kind of this breakneck, sort of stretch of visits and commitments and things like that. And Indiana's obviously been pretty active in it. So we'll do one of these probably I won't say every morning for the next couple weeks, but probably we'll do morning check-ins, at least as news kind of comes. And obviously there was news over the weekend first, just kind of talking about, sort of the commitment. Indiana landed Miles Rice, the reigning Pac-12 freshman of the year. I believe he was first team all Pac-12. He's a point guard. People who have watched more Pac-12 basketball than me, forgive me. I have 2 kids. There's no way I can stay up that late anymore. Talk about Rice, rave about Rice as a playmaker, at a level that Indiana's maybe not consistently had at point guard for some time. Obviously, it's had that in moments. You think about Xavier Johnson's Big Ten season, his first year in Bloomington in 2022. You think about, Trey Galloway maybe starting to break into that role a little bit more last year. But Indiana's not had a player who was just a proven out and out point guard who was healthy. I mean, that's the thing about Xavier Johnson. Unfortunately, his last 2 seasons were so broken up by injuries that it sort of felt like we never quite saw him find that rhythm and that comfort that he had in the 2021-2022 season. Again, there were windows, there were moments, but it just felt like it was so stop-start for him essentially, that you never felt like, Indiana quite got that player back. And when you look at Rice's profile, when you look at kind of what Indiana, or excuse me, what Washington State was able to do with him, he was a freshman last season. Technically, he actually redshirted his first year in college, which was, I guess you'd say, 3 seasons ago now. Then 2 seasons ago, he actually, unless I'm mistaken on this, the NCAA still allows you to pause your eligibility clock for sort of serious exceptions, and he had cancer. Rice did, and so he went through the process of treating his cancer, and he basically took a year off and he paused his eligibility clock for that, and then he came back last year, and last year was sort of, technically from an eligibility standpoint was his redshirt freshman year. And if you look at, he was good around the rim. He was outstanding in league play. His assist rate actually went up 3% in league play, even though his turnover rate only climbed 0.1%. He was top 10 in percentage of minutes played among Pac-12 players in league play. He was top 20 in percentage of possessions used. He took a high volume of shots. If I'm not mistaken, he was Washington State's highest percentage of shots taken among any player he was. And that's in addition to being obviously, far and away Washington State's most creative force. He was really good at the free throw line. Shot 81% from the free throw line, close to 79% in conference play. He was only 36 of 131, which is 27.5% from behind the three-point line. But there was a stretch of the season where I believe he missed 22 threes in a row. And I recognize, listen, you don't just get to sort of dismiss that like it never happened. But if you do kind of remove that stretch, he goes up to about a 33% three-point shooter. And so, again, it's kind of this idea that maybe there's a suggestion he is a better shooter than what we saw last season, and fatigue kind of wore him down a little bit. He missed 22 in a row between February 22nd and March 15th, and then he went 2 of 6 across Washington State's 2 NCAA tournament games. So the point is, Indiana's getting a player that, by any measure is going to be as creative as anybody they've got on the roster. he's a player who I think Indiana's confident is going to be able to, really sort of thrive in Mike Woodson's ball screen offense. And he's a player that I would expect to start pretty much right away in Bloomington, whether that's in place of somebody, probably alongside somebody who's already in the program. But to transition, that's what we call a transition in the business, Indiana is still looking at a number of guards. In particular, Connor Hickman completed his Indiana visit, I guess, last night, Sunday night. We're talking Monday morning, 15th. He's making a visit to Cincinnati now, and my understanding is the decision will come after that, probably not very long after that. It'll probably come fairly quickly. And I do think, based on my perception, I do think it's probably IU or Cincinnati. Obviously, Indiana has some strong ties, given that Hickman is from Bloomington. He played at Bloomington South. He's a very good player at Bloomington South. I saw him when Indiana was recruiting Anthony Leal and thought he was a high major guard. He was one of those players that, unfortunately, the summer that he would have gone out, spring and summer, that he would have gone out and really kind of earned those minutes on the AAU circuit. The AAU season was canceled because of COVID. Bradley wound up taking him, and it's worth saying that his relationship is strong with Drew Adams, who was on support staff at Indiana under Tom Crean and was an assistant at Bradley when Hickman signed there. Drew Adams really kind of invested a lot of time and effort in recruiting Hickman, stuck with Hickman, vouched for him and all that. And Adams is now at Cincinnati. So that's where the tie-in is, over at Cincinnati. And I don't think Cincinnati is, just sort of I don't think it's just a sort of a token visit or, a favor or anything like that. I think Hickman is seriously considering between both schools. But again, I would expect that recruitment, one way or the other, to probably come to a close sometime. My best guess is this week, maybe even early this week, once Hickman completes that Cincinnati visit. Oumar Ballo, the Arizona big man, who I think ESPN has as the number one rated transfer in the portal at the moment. Ballo is a player Indiana fans will remember from playing Arizona 2 seasons ago. He actually was at Gonzaga in 2021, then transferred with Tommy Lloyd when Lloyd took the Arizona job to Arizona in 2022. Across the last 2 seasons, he's been about as good of a rebounder as anybody in the country. Bar maybe somebody like Zach Edey. And you look at last year, he was first in the Pac-12 in conference-only offensive rebound rate. He was second in conference-only defensive rebound rate. He was top 20 nationally across the course of the entire season in both of those numbers. He is very much a true 5. He's never attempted a three-pointer in his career. He's a high volume free throw shooter. He led the Pac-12 each of the last 2 seasons in free throw rate. He was top 20, I guess he top 30. He was 26th nationally in free throw rate last year. He was 18th nationally in free throw rate 2 years ago. But he's only a 56.4% free throw shooter, so he gets there a ton. He shot over 500 free throws in his career, despite the fact that only about 125 of those came in his first 2 seasons. He does not hit them with a ton of efficiency, but he does get there a lot. He does get opponents in foul trouble a lot, and he doesn't commit a lot of fouls. It's worth saying the last 2 seasons, 3.3 fouls committed per 40 minutes, 3.2 fouls committed per 40 minutes. So for a big man who is a good shot blocker, maybe not an elite one, but a good one, and is an elite rebounder at 7 foot, 250, 260. He's also a really good finisher. He's a career 64.6% on twos. He was top 10 in the Pac-12 in 2-point field goal percentage each of the last 2 seasons. For a player with that kind of sort of presence at both rims, he is not that foul prone, which is obviously good for Indiana as well. But he's a different kind of center to, if he does commit, and there's a lot of smoke on the wind that that Indiana's in a really good spot with him. We'll see where things stand emerging from this visit. If he does come to Indiana, he will be distinct to what Kel'el Ware was, certainly, and even to an extent what Trayce Jackson-Davis was. I think you're thinking about a player that is a little bit more in the mold of someone like Zach Edey, just to use a recent Big Ten comparison, or Kofi Coburn, somebody who is really going to be, kind of 6 feet and in. A lot of the time, again, he's never even attempted a 3 in his college career. So you're not talking about somebody who's going to try and stretch the floor. You are probably talking about someone who's going to command starters minutes, which means that Indiana, if Indiana lands Oumar Ballo, is probably going to be playing some more two-big basketball. And that's going to, basically count on Malik Reneau to add some more offensive depth to his game. We saw little bits and pieces of that with Reneau last season. His three-point shot kind of faded as the year went on. To be fair, I think he was also tired and probably carrying a little bit of an injury. He had that ankle problem or whatever it was coming out of the Iowa game that at times it looked like, even though he was playing, he was maybe not, 100% fit, but maybe playing through some pain and just kind of trying to soldier through. But in either case, if you get a player like Oumar Ballo, he's not coming here to play off the bench. He's coming here to start. And with Malik Reneau coming back, I think you're going to see more of that two-big basketball. That doesn't mean you're going to see it exclusively, although I do think it's possible Indiana still if Indiana, hypothetically, is, and I've got, forgive me, up here on my monitor, I've got Ballo's KenPom profile. If Indiana was to land Oumar Ballo, I don't necessarily think, based on what I have heard, that would rule them out of the Pharrell Payne or the Amari Williams. I think Indiana would still have a chance based on some minutes opportunities, even off the bench, based on some NIL opportunities, to bring in another, let's say, notable, sort of true five or more or less true five player, somebody who you might look at a hypothetical commitment from Ballo and say, well, I don't know if this guy would want to come in and play if he knows he's going to be behind Ballo and Reneau. I'm not sure Indiana wouldn't still be able to get a player like that. I think it would just depend on the situation. Again, I think it would depend a little bit on NIL opportunities. It would be worth saying if Indiana were able to bring someone like that in and basically just sell kind of a tight three-man rotation. You're talking about being able to, again, to use maybe the Purdue comparison, do a little bit of what Purdue did last season, where at times Purdue would play, and Purdue started two bigs with Edey and Trey Kaufman-Renn, and it's not like, Malik Reneau was probably more offensively flexible last season than Trey Kaufman-Renn was. It didn't stop Kaufman-Renn from being part of one of the most efficient offenses in the country. But Purdue was also able to flex to someone like a Mason Gillis, or I think they did it less often, but someone like a Miles Colvin at the four, and be able to play Edey or Kaufman-Renn, or even sometimes Caleb Furst as the five, and play smaller and play a little bit more of kind of a flex four and some small ball. And I think there's a world where Indiana could do that, because we've seen Indiana add Mackenzie Mbako. We've seen Indiana add Bryson Tucker, or not add Mackenzie Mbako, keep Mackenzie Mbako. Mbako has announced he's back. Add Bryson Tucker. So suddenly you've got some real impact wing depth and some talent there. And I think there's a world where you can, build a rotation that basically has if you can get someone like Pharrell Payne, and I'm using this example because he's also expected to visit Indiana here in the next few days. If you were able to get somebody like that to buy into the idea of coming to Bloomington and maybe at least initially playing off the bench, then you could build a rotation in that front court, that 3-4-5, where you could kind of go with your three bigs and your two wings, and some of the time you're playing big, but some of the time you're playing small, and you don't necessarily have to sort of marry yourself to one or the other, if that makes sense. So we'll see how that goes. The other name I think worth mentioning in particular, and there is again a lot of smoke kind of blowing around, Kanan Carlisle, who is a Stanford transfer. He was a freshman last season. He was all Pac-12 freshman team. Like Miles Rice, he's from Atlanta. I think you're seeing a lot of the Yasir Roseman connections, kind of playing through with those guys. Carlisle averaged double figures in scoring last season at Stanford. Wasn't always the most efficient player, which happens for a freshman, but he did have a handful of games. I think he scored 28 against Arizona. I think he broke 30. I'll pull up while we're talking here. I think he broke 30 against, I want to say, Washington State. Kind of tailed off a little bit. 31 against Washington State, 22 against Oregon State, 28 against Arizona. All of that, basically once Pac-12 play restarted. Tailed off a little bit toward the end of the season, only scored in double figures in 5 of Stanford's last 9 games, and didn't score more than 12 points in the game after January 20th. But again, that happens with freshmen sometimes. And obviously, Stanford kind of had a bit of a struggle down the stretch. I mean, Stanford, at one point was 10-8 and 5-3, and won 3 games after January 20th. So, it's a little bit, at least in the regular season, and they went 1-1 in the conference tournament. It's a little bit of kind of, chicken and egg. Is it, does the a freshman fading sort of affect his team's performances, or maybe is Carlisle's sort of, kind of wear and tear across the course of the season a combination of a freshman, just kind of hitting a little bit of that physical wall that happens in a guy's first year in college basketball a lot, coupled to maybe a team just, starting to sink and everything kind of pulling down together. But I think Indiana's in a very good spot for Carlisle. And I think that, that's another one that I think Indiana fans will justifiably watch closely when he's on campus this coming weekend, which is Little Five weekend. Go Phi-Psi. That's a lot. It's almost 16 minutes. I guess it's going to be over 16 minutes by the time we finish this. There are some other names to throw out there. Amari Williams from Drexel is scheduled for a visit next weekend. It's always worth saying, this stuff changes fast. I think Jeff Borzello from ESPN already reported that Williams removed a visit from his planned schedule because, a piece had moved somewhere else and suddenly a school wasn't looking for that player anymore. That happens. That happens with everybody. And again, it's all part of kind of this post portal dead period sort of sprint that everybody goes through to try and, kind of the players need to find homes. The schools need to start filling up their roster spots, and everybody's just kind of in this race to, essentially kind of, it's almost kind of like musical chairs, and you don't want to be the one that's still standing when the music stops. So that's probably as a father of kindergartners, that's probably the best comparison I can come up with. And I do expect that Indiana will move fairly quickly. For example, Indiana, based on what I've heard, is also still interested in a potential visit from Ryan Conwell, the Pike alum who's transferring from Indiana State, averaged double figures in scoring last season, shot better than 40% from the 3-point line. But if you could get, for example, Connor Hickman, again, this is hypothetical, but if you could get Connor Hickman and Kanan Carlisle, then that can change, and suddenly maybe the program doesn't have the need for guards that it once did. The player might look at it and say, well, that's a lot of minutes that are already eaten up, or that I'm going to have to go fight for, where I could go over here where I'm immediately going to, walk into 30 a game or whatever. That's just the nature of this time of year. It's kind of everything that goes on in high school recruiting, but just confined to like a month rather than, 2 or even 3 years of kind of a rolling process. It just happens a lot faster. So we'll check in with these, certainly as news develops. And then also once we get, to kind of, again, maybe sort of morning check-ins as there is news, just to kind of recap what's happened, where things are going, all that. We'll try not to speculate too much. But it is, I use the word hypothetical a lot in this video because, there are so many moving pieces at this time of year, and especially for a program like Indiana that very clearly has the NIL resources to offer. And I've written this a few times. I've said this, I think, on our podcast. My understanding is, those numbers they were already healthy and they've gone up considerably since. Within the last year or so, I think there's been a genuine sort of push from bigger NIL boosters to support Mike Woodson. And Indiana's got spots to fill. Indiana still has, I think, 6 open scholarships. Not saying they're necessarily going to fill every single one of them, but, you still got a lot of bodies to add. And again, you don't want to be the team that maybe moves a little too slowly, and when the music stops, there's no place for you. So I would expect, things to happen fairly quickly for Indiana, whether it is guys committing or maybe guys moving on, and Indiana, making a left turn, not necessarily taking a lot of time, but, just kind of reformulating a plan and attacking it from a different direction. So again, we'll do more of these, just kind of portal check-ins, but I imagine it's going to be a pretty busy week. So Thanks for watching. If you made it all the way through here for the Indianapolis Star, I'm Zach Osterman. We'll talk to you soon.